You gave up your seat on the train to a tired man. He handed you his card, whispering, "Contact me for a job." At first, you thought it was a joke, some kind of strange thank you that meant nothing. The train was crowded that morning, bodies pressed against bodies. Everyone lost in their phones, their problems, their rush to get somewhere that probably didn't matter as much as they thought it did. But there he was, this man in his 50s, maybe 60s, swaying on his feet. His eyes had that look. You know the one. The look of someone who's been carrying the world on his shoulders for too long. His suit was expensive but wrinkled like he'd slept in it. Maybe he had. You stood up. It wasn't heroic. It wasn't special. It was just human. "Please take my seat," you said. He looked at you like you'd spoken in a foreign language. When was the last time someone had shown him simple kindness? When was the last time any of us really see each other on these trains, in these cities, in this life where we're all just trying to survive another day? He sat down heavily, and for a moment you thought that was it. Another small gesture lost in the chaos of urban life. Another moment that would fade into the background noise of existence. But then he reached into his jacket pocket. The business card was simple, elegant, just a name and a number. But it was what he said, as he pressed it into your hand, that changed everything. "Contact me for a job. Someone who gives up their seat for a stranger is someone I want on my team." You almost laughed. Almost. What kind of job interview happens on a train? What kind of opportunity comes from simply being decent in a world that tells us to hustle, to network, to strategize every move? Could it really be this simple? The train lurched forward, people shuffled, life continued its relentless march. But something had shifted in that cramped metal tube hurtling through the darkness, something that would ripple outward in ways you couldn't possibly imagine, because sometimes the universe has a funny way of rewarding the smallest acts of humanity. Sometimes a seat on a train becomes a seat at a table you never knew existed. 3 days passed before you looked at the card again. It sat on your kitchen counter between the unpaid bills and the coffee stains, a small rectangle of possibility in a life that had felt increasingly like a dead end. You'd been job hunting for months, sending out resumes into the void, attending interviews where they smiled and said, "We'll be in touch," but never were. The name on the card meant nothing to you. James Chen could have been anyone. Could have been no one, but something about that moment on the train kept pulling at you, the way he'd looked at you, not with pity or condescension, but with recognition, like he'd seen something in that simple gesture that even you didn't know was there. What did you have to lose? Another rejection, another closed door? You'd collected so many of those, they'd started to feel like badges of failure pinned to your chest. You picked up your phone, put it down, picked it up again. What if this was just some elaborate prank? What if he didn't even remember you? What if— Stop. The what-ifs will kill you faster than any rejection ever could. You know this. You've lived this. Every opportunity you'd talked yourself out of, every chance you'd let fear steal from you, they all started with what if. The phone rang twice before he answered. "I was wondering when you'd call," he said. No hello, no introduction. Just that simple statement that somehow made you feel like you were already late for something important. If you're watching this right now, maybe you're sitting on your own version of that business card. Maybe you're holding back because the voice in your head is listing all the reasons why it won't work, why you're not ready, why tomorrow would be better than today. But let me tell you something about tomorrow. It has a funny way of never actually arriving. Like this video, if you've ever let fear make your decisions for you. Subscribe if you're ready to stop. "Can you meet me tomorrow?" he asked. "There's something I want to show you." The address he gave you wasn't what you expected. Not some gleaming office tower, not some corporate headquarters with security guards and marble lobbies. It was a warehouse, old, industrial, the kind of place that looked forgotten by time and progress. But you went anyway. Because sometimes the most important journeys start in the most unlikely places. The warehouse smelled like sawdust and possibility. Inside, it wasn't abandoned at all. It was alive, buzzing with an energy that made the air itself feel electric. People were everywhere, building things, designing things, creating things. Not in suits and ties, but in jeans and t-shirts splattered with paint and purpose. "Welcome to where we actually change the world," James said, appearing beside you like he'd materialized from the creative chaos around you. You must have looked confused because he smiled, the first real smile you'd seen from him. It transformed his face, made him look decades younger, like the weight he'd been carrying on that train had been temporarily lifted. "This isn't what you expected, is it?" he said. "Good. Expectations are just limitations we haven't questioned yet." He led you through the space, past 3D printers humming with possibility, past architects bent over blueprints of buildings that didn't exist yet, past a group of young people arguing passionately about something involving solar panels and social justice. Every corner revealed another project, another dream being pulled from the realm of imagination into reality. This wasn't just a workspace. It was an incubator for impossible things. 5 years ago, I was just another CEO, James said, stopping at a wall covered in photographs. "Big salary, bigger ego, biggest emptiness you've ever seen. I built a company that made money by making nothing that mattered. We optimized, we leveraged, we synergized. We did everything except remember why we started in the first place." The photographs on the wall weren't of corporate achievements or ribbon-cutting ceremonies. They were of water pumps in African villages, of children in makeshift schools holding tablets loaded with educational software, of solar panels on hurricane-damaged homes in Puerto Rico, of urban gardens growing in food deserts. "Then my daughter asked me a question that changed everything," he continued, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. She said, "Daddy, when you die, will the world be different because you lived?" How would you answer that question? Not with words, but with your life. I couldn't sleep that night, or the next, because the answer was no. The world would go on exactly as it was, maybe with a few more dollars shuffled from one account to another, but nothing real would have changed. No life would be better, no problem would be solved, no child would go to bed with more hope than they woke up with. He turned to face you then, and in his eyes you saw the same intensity from the train, but now you understood what it was. It wasn't exhaustion, it was urgency. The urgency of someone who'd woken up to how much time they'd wasted and how little time was left to waste. So I burned it all down. Not literally, though some days I wanted to. I took everything I'd built and asked a different question. What if business wasn't about taking, but about giving? What if success wasn't measured in profit margins, but in problems solved? What if the real ROI was return on impact? Around you, the warehouse hummed with the answer to those questions. "But why me?" you finally asked. "Because I gave up a seat on a train." James walked you to a quieter corner of the warehouse, where a small office had been carved out of the chaos. The walls were glass, so even in separation, you remained part of the larger organism of creation happening all around. "Let me tell you about the $100 million mistake I almost made," he said, pouring 2 cups of coffee from a pot that looked like it had seen better decades. 3 years ago, I was hiring for a critical position. The kind of role that could make or break what we were trying to build here. I had it narrowed down to 2 candidates. He handed you the coffee. It was terrible. He knew it. You knew it. Neither of you cared. The first candidate had everything. MBA from Wharton, 10 years at McKinsey, references that read like a who's who of Silicon Valley. During the interview, he said all the right things, hit all the right notes, even had a PowerPoint about his vision for social impact. It was perfect, too perfect. The noise from the warehouse filtered through the glass walls, hammering, laughter, the occasional whoop of triumph or groan of frustration. It was the sound of people who cared about what they were doing. The second candidate had none of that polish. Community college degree, bounced between jobs. But during the interview, the fire alarm went off. False alarm. Turned out someone had burned popcorn in the microwave. Everyone started filing out, but there was an elderly woman in a wheelchair struggling with the door. Without hesitation, without thinking about the interview or making an impression, this candidate jumped up to help her. Stayed with her until she was safe. Came back 15 minutes later, apologizing for the delay. Share this video if you know someone who would have helped that woman. Comment below if you've ever been that person, the one who does the right thing even when no one's keeping score. Guess which one I hired? James asked, though his smile gave away the answer. The MBA? He sent a follow-up email complaining about the unprofessional interruption of the fire alarm, said it had thrown off his presentation. The other candidate? She never even mentioned it. Just picked up where we left off, talking about her ideas with the same passion as before. He leaned forward, his hands wrapped around his terrible coffee like it was precious. That hire. She's now running our entire education initiative, has helped us put technology in the hands of over 100,000 students who would never have had access otherwise. Not because of her degree, not because of her resume, but because she was the kind of person who stops to help when help is needed, just like you did on that train. You felt something shift in your chest. A loosening of a knot you didn't know was there. I don't hire resumes, James continued. I hire humans, and humans reveal themselves in the small moments, the moments when they think no one's watching, when there's no profit in being good, when kindness is just kindness, not a strategy. He stood up, moved to the glass wall, looking out at the controlled chaos of people building tomorrow. Every person out there, they're here because somewhere along the way, they chose people over profit. They chose impact over income. They chose to see problems as opportunities to help, not opportunities to exploit. That's what I saw in you on that train. In 60 seconds, you showed me more about your character than most people reveal in 60-minute interviews. But I don't even know what you do here, you said. I don't know if I'm qualified for... Stop. James held up his hand. That's the old world talking. The world that told you to fit yourself into boxes other people created. Let me ask you something. What breaks your heart? The question hung in the air between you like a challenge. What breaks your heart? When was the last time someone asked you that in a job interview? When was the last time someone cared about your pain as a qualification? I mean it, he pressed. When you look at the world, what makes you angry? What keeps you up at night? What problem do you see that everyone else seems to ignore? You thought about it, really thought about it. Not the surface answers, not the safe responses, but the truth that lived in the depths of your frustration with the way things were. Food waste, you finally said. I used to volunteer at a shelter. We'd turn away donations because we didn't have storage, while restaurants 3 blocks away threw out perfectly good food. The inefficiency of it, the stupidity of it. People hungry on one corner, food in dumpsters on another. It's not a supply problem. It's a connection problem. It's a human problem. James's eyes lit up like you'd just given him a gift. Show me, he said, standing suddenly. Don't tell me, show me. He led you to an empty section of the warehouse, a blank canvas of concrete and possibility. You have 2 hours. Access to anyone here, any resource we have. Show me how you'd solve your heartbreak. But I don't have a plan. Good. Plans are just guesses dressed up in certainty. Have experience. Even better. Experience often just teaches us why something can't be done. You know what you do have? You have eyes that see a problem and a heart that can't unsee it. Start there. The rest is just details. For a moment, you stood in that empty space, paralyzed by possibility. Then something sparked. Maybe it was the energy of the place. Maybe it was the permission to try. Maybe it was just the novel experience of someone believing in your anger as much as your ability. You started moving, first to the group working on logistics software, then to the team designing refrigeration units, then to the people building apps. What if became your new favorite phrase. What if we could connect restaurants to shelters in real time? What if we could track food safety automatically? What if volunteers could sign up for pickup slots like Uber drivers? 2 hours flew by like 2 minutes. When James returned, you'd covered an entire wall with diagrams, sticky notes, connections, possibilities. It wasn't polished, it wasn't perfect, but it was alive with the energy of someone who'd finally been asked the right question. This, you said, breathless with the excitement of creation, this could work. We'd need to start small, maybe just one neighborhood, but if we could prove the model. You're hired, James interrupted, but you haven't even heard the whole, I don't need to, I've seen enough. The first month was like drinking from a fire hose while running a marathon in a thunderstorm. You weren't given a job title because, as James explained, titles are just limitations with business cards. Instead, you were given a problem to solve and the freedom to solve it. The food waste project that had started as scribbles on a wall became your obsession, your purpose, your reason to show up every day, even when imposter syndrome whispered that you didn't belong there. The warehouse became your second home, first to arrive, last to leave, not because anyone demanded it, but because for the first time in your life, work didn't feel like work. It felt like building something that mattered. But here's what they don't tell you about following your passion. Passion doesn't make it easy. Passion makes it possible. The first restaurant you approached laughed at you. Too complicated, they said. Too much liability, too much hassle for no profit. The second one didn't even let you finish your pitch. The third, fourth, fifth, a symphony of rejection that felt personal because it was personal. This wasn't just an idea. This was your heartbreak trying to heal itself. Remember that elderly woman on the train, the one whose seat you gave up? You thought about her during the rejections. What if she was hungry? What if she was one of the invisible people your app could help? The what-ifs that used to paralyze you now propelled you forward. On the 37th try, yes, you kept count, something shifted. A small family restaurant run by immigrants who knew what hungry meant, who remembered when strangers had helped them, said yes. Not an enthusiastic yes, a skeptical, cautious, we'll try it for a week, yes. But yes, nonetheless, that first successful food rescue, 40 pounds of perfectly good meals that would have gone to waste, delivered instead to a shelter where 60 people got dinner. You cried. Standing in the alley behind the restaurant, watching the volunteer drive away with food that would feed people instead of rotting in a dumpster, you actually cried, not from sadness, from the overwhelming realization that you'd done something real, something that mattered, something that wouldn't have existed if you hadn't stood up on a train one ordinary morning. James found you there in that alley, tears streaming down your face. First success, he asked. You nodded, unable to speak. Good. Now multiply it by 1,000. That's your new heartbreak. Because now you know it's possible, and every meal wasted is a choice, not an inevitability. He was right. The success made the failure harder to bear, but it also made the fight impossible to abandon. One restaurant became 5, 5 became 20, 20 became a movement. The app you'd sketched on a wall evolved, improved, scaled. Volunteers signed up faster than you could onboard them. Shelters reported increased donations, better variety, fresher food. But the real magic wasn't in the numbers, it was in the stories. The single mother who posted about feeding her kids with rescued meals when her paycheck ran short. The restaurant owner who discovered that giving felt better than selling. The volunteer who found purpose after retirement by becoming a food hero every Tuesday and Thursday. 6 months in, a major tech company offered to buy your platform for more money than you'd ever dreamed of having. Your call, James said when you brought him the offer. But remember why we started. You turned them down. Money wasn't the metric anymore. Impact was. Lives changed was. Dignity preserved was. Problem solved was. Year 2 brought challenges no business school case study could have prepared you for. The platform was working too well. Success brought scrutiny, and scrutiny brought obstacles. Health departments suddenly discovered regulations that had been ignored for decades. Insurance companies found new liabilities to fear. Competitors who'd laughed at your naive idealism now saw you as a threat to their waste management contracts. This is where most people quit, James told you, during a particularly brutal week when 3 major partners pulled out due to legal concerns. When doing good gets hard, when the system you're trying to fix starts fighting back, when you realize that some people profit from problems and have no interest in solutions. Have you ever noticed that? How the moment you try to change something, really change it, the world seems to conspire to stop you? Not because change is impossible, but because change is uncomfortable, and comfort has a lobby, a legal team, and a marketing budget. But you'd learned something in those warehouse walls, surrounded by other heartbroken fixers. The system fights back because the system knows you can win. So you fought smarter, hired lawyers who believed in the mission and worked for equity instead of fees. Partnered with universities to study the health impact of food rescue, creating data that bureaucrats couldn't ignore. Turned your volunteers into advocates who showed up at city council meetings with stories that made regulations seem foolish in the face of human need. The breakthrough came from an unexpected place. Remember that first restaurant that said yes? The immigrant family who took a chance? Their daughter was now in law school. Inspired by what she'd seen you build, she wrote a paper that redefined food rescue under Good Samaritan laws, creating a legal framework that protected donors and distributors. One paper, one young woman who'd watched her parents feed the hungry, one ripple from that stone you'd thrown. Within months, 3 states adopted the framework. The federal government took notice. What had started as scribbles on a warehouse wall was becoming policy, becoming law, becoming the new normal. Like and subscribe if you believe that ordinary people can create extraordinary change. Drop a comment about a time when fighting through the hard part led to something beautiful. Sometimes we need to remind each other that the darkness before dawn isn't a cliché, it's a promise. But success, James warned you, had its own dangers. The moment you stop feeling the heartbreak, he said, is the moment you become part of the problem. Success can numb you to the pain that started this. Don't let it. So you kept going back to the shelters. Kept talking to the people your platform served. Kept your ear to the ground and your heart open to the hurt. Because the moment you started celebrating in boardrooms instead of alleyways was the moment you'd lose the plot. One night, exhausted after an 18-hour day of putting out fires and building bridges, you found yourself on the same train where it all started. Same route, same time. Same crowd of tired humans just trying to get home. An elderly man struggled to stay standing, swaying with the train's movement. Without thinking, you stood up. "Please, take my seat." He looked at you with surprise, then gratitude, then something deeper, recognition maybe, of kindness in a world that had forgotten its definition. As he sat down, he smiled. "Thank you. You have no idea what this means today, but you did. You knew exactly what it meant, because every small act of kindness was a rebellion against indifference. Every seat given up was a vote for a world where we see each other. Really see each other." The train rolled on. You stood. He sat. The universe took notes. By year 3, the numbers had become astronomical. 10 million meals rescued. 50,000 volunteers activated. 300 cities connected. But James taught you to look past the metrics to the meaning. Each number was a life touched, a dignity preserved, a problem solved. But numbers could also become a shield, a way to avoid seeing the faces behind the statistics. "Tell me about the last person you helped," James would ask in meetings when executives got too excited about growth projections. "Not the last 1,000, the last one. What's their name? What's their story?" Why did they need us? It was his way of keeping the heartbreak alive, of preventing success from becoming its own form of failure. You told him about Maria, 63 years old, laid off after 20 years at a factory that moved overseas. Too young for Social Security, too old to start over, too proud to beg. She'd been skipping meals to pay for her diabetes medication when a volunteer delivered rescued food from a high-end restaurant that was closing for renovations. Salmon, fresh vegetables, bread that was still warm. She cried, you said. Not because she was hungry, but because she could eat without shame, without feeling like a charity case. She said it felt like the universe was looking out for her. James nodded. That's why we do this, not to solve hunger. That's too big, too abstract. We do this to make sure Maria knows she matters. The rest is just scale. But scale brought its own complications. Success attracted attention, and attention attracted agendas. Venture capitalists circled like sharks, smelling money in your mission. Politicians wanted photo ops at your facilities. Corporations wanted to partner in ways that would have turned your solution into their tax write-off. The hardest no you ever had to say was to a billionaire who offered to fund expansion into 1,000 cities overnight. The catch? He wanted to monetize the data, sell information about hunger patterns to food manufacturers and grocery chains. It's win-win, he insisted. They get market insights, you get funding, everyone benefits. Everyone except the people who trust us with their dignity, you replied. We're not in the business of turning vulnerability into profit margins. He laughed. Actually laughed. You're naive. Data is the new oil. You're sitting on a gold mine and choosing to stay poor. No, you said, thinking of Maria, of the elderly man on the train, of every person who'd ever been reduced to a data point. We're choosing to stay human. He left, shaking his head, muttering about idealists and missed opportunities. But that night, your platform processed more donations than ever before. Somehow, the universe had a way of rewarding the NOs that mattered. The warehouse had expanded now, taking over the entire block. What had started as James's experiment in conscious capitalism had become an ecosystem of world changers. Your food rescue platform was just one branch of a tree whose roots ran deep into the soil of systemic change. Education initiatives, clean water projects, renewable energy solutions, mental health support systems. Each project connected to the others, creating a web of impact that was stronger than its individual threads. But the most powerful expansion wasn't in square footage or program offerings. It was in mindset. The warehouse had become a pilgrimage site for the heartbroken fixers of the world. People came from everywhere, drawn by the radical idea that business could be about more than business, that success could be measured in lives changed rather than wealth accumulated. You'd become, without meaning to, one of the wise ones. The person new arrivals sought out, clutching their own versions of business cards picked up in unexpected places, carrying their own heartbreaks like precious cargo. How do I start? They'd ask. How do I know if my idea is good enough? How do I find the courage? And you'd tell them about a train, about a seat, about the moment when being human was enough to change everything. 5 years in, everything changed again. James collapsed during a board meeting. Heart attack, the kind that comes from carrying the world's weight while forgetting to put it down sometimes. The kind that reminds you that even superheroes are made of flesh and blood and finite heartbeats. The warehouse fell silent when the news spread. Not the productive quiet of focused work, but the hollow quiet of loss anticipated. Everyone had their James story. The moment he'd seen something in them they didn't see in themselves, the time he'd pushed them past their comfort zone into their purpose zone, the way he'd made them believe that business could be a force for healing rather than harm. You sat by his hospital bed watching machines breathe for him, thinking about circles, how a moment of kindness on a train had led to millions of meals rescued, how giving up a seat had given you a seat at tables you'd never imagined existing. How one tired man's business card had become a movement that spanned continents. "Don't you dare turn this into a tragedy," he whispered when he finally woke up, weak but still fierce. "This is just another problem to solve, and we're problem solvers, remember? But some problems can't be solved, only accepted, only integrated into the story in ways that make sense of senselessness." The doctors were clear. His heart had been damaged. Not just by the attack, but by years of running on passion instead of rest, of feeding others while forgetting to nourish himself. He could live, they said, but differently, slower, smaller. The very things that made him James would be the things that killed him if he didn't change. "I need you to take over," he said one afternoon, the warehouse visible through his hospital window like a promise keeping itself. Not just the food program, all of it. The whole beautiful, messy experiment in proving business can have a soul. "I can't. I'm not ready. Neither was I. Neither is anyone who does anything worth doing. Ready is a luxury we can't afford when the world is burning and we're holding water." You thought about every excuse. You weren't trained for this. You didn't have the experience, the connections, the credibility. You were just someone who'd given up a seat on a train. How did that qualify you to run an organization that now employed hundreds and impacted millions? "Remember what I told you about heartbreak?" James continued. "It's not a weakness, it's a qualification. The world has enough leaders who know how to read spreadsheets. What we need are leaders who know how to read pain and translate it into possibility." The board meeting where they announced your appointment was surreal. You who'd walked into this warehouse with nothing but good intentions and bad coffee tolerance were now responsible for keeping the dream alive. The looks around the table ranged from skepticism to hope, with a heavy dose of "let's see what happens" in between. Your first act as CEO was to institute mandatory rest days. Your second was to create a fund for employees' personal projects, the heartbreaks they carried that didn't fit neatly into existing programs. Your third was to turn down a merger offer that would have made everyone rich, but would have transformed the warehouse from an incubator of impossible things into just another corporate campus with better PR. "The old world is dying," you said at your first all-hands meeting, channeling everything James had taught you. "A new world is being born. We get to be the midwives. Not because we're special, but because we're here and we're willing. And we've seen what happens when ordinary people decide extraordinary change is possible." The next 2 years tested every principle you'd learned in those warehouse walls. A pandemic shut down half your programs overnight. The very connections you'd built, restaurants to shelters, volunteers to communities, became impossible when connection itself became dangerous. You watched 5 years of work evaporate in 5 days of lockdown orders. But here's what heartbreak teaches you: how to pivot with purpose. Within 72 hours, your food rescue platform had transformed into a delivery service for the elderly and immunocompromised. Volunteers who couldn't gather in person coordinated online, creating phone trees to check on isolated neighbors. Restaurants that couldn't serve diners pivoted to preparing meals exclusively for donation. The warehouse became a distribution center for PPE made by the same 3D printers that had been creating water filters. Crisis revealed character, and character created opportunity. "We're not disaster responders," one board member argued during an emergency video call. "This isn't our mandate. Our mandate is to solve problems that break hearts," you replied. "Have you looked outside lately? Every heart is breaking. If not now, when? If not us, who?" The programs that emerged from that chaos were different from what you'd planned, but truer to the mission than anything you'd done before. Mental health support groups that met in virtual reality, job training programs for industries that were hiring when everything else was firing, microloans for small businesses with macro impacts on their communities. You learned that resilience wasn't about bouncing back to where you were. It was about bouncing forward to where you needed to be. One night, Exhausted from another 18-hour day of crisis management, you found yourself alone in the warehouse. The space that had once buzzed with physical presence now hummed with digital energy, screens glowing with virtual meetings, servers processing thousands of aid requests, 3D printers working through the night to create face shields. On the wall, someone had spray-painted a question: what if the crisis is the curriculum? You stood there, in the strange silence of a building working at full capacity with minimal human presence, and understood something fundamental. Every obstacle was an invitation. Every breakdown was a breakthrough waiting to be discovered. Every moment of heartbreak was just love, looking for a more effective expression. Your phone buzzed. A message from Maria, the woman whose story you'd shared with James. She'd started a community kitchen in her neighborhood, teaching others to cook with rescued food. The student had become the teacher. The helped had become the helper. The circle continued its sacred spin. That's when you knew the warehouse had succeeded in its deepest mission. Not to solve all the world's problems, that was never possible, but to prove that ordinary people could become extraordinary problem solvers when given permission, resources, and belief. To demonstrate that business could be about multiplication rather than extraction. To show that the smallest acts of kindness, like giving up a seat on a train, could ripple outward in waves that reshape the world. James passed away on a Tuesday. It was quiet, they said, peaceful. His heart, worn out from a lifetime of carrying others' pain, finally decided it had done enough. He was in the warehouse when it happened, sitting in the corner where he'd first shown you that wall of photographs. Still building, still dreaming, still believing that tomorrow could be different from today if we had the courage to make it so. The funeral was unlike any you'd attended. Instead of mourning, it felt like a celebration of possibility. People flew in from around the world, each carrying a story of how James had changed their trajectory, with a question, a challenge, or simple belief in their hidden potential. The warehouse overflowed with flowers that would later be composted into gardens that would feed communities that would remember him every time something green pushed through dark soil. You spoke last, standing where he'd stood so many times, looking out at faces that reflected every kind of heartbreak and every kind of hope. James asked me once what broke my heart, you began. Today, it's knowing that he won't see what happens next. But then I realize he already did. He saw it in every person he hired for their humanity instead of their resume. He saw it in every project that chose impact over income. He saw it in a train, in a moment of simple kindness between strangers, the entire future we're now living. He didn't build this warehouse, we did. He didn't rescue those meals, or teach those children, or install those solar panels. We did. All he did was ask us the right question. What breaks your heart? And then he gave us permission to fix it. So here's my question for you. What happens now, when the person who believed in us before we believed in ourselves is gone? When the voice that reminded us to stay human in inhuman systems has fallen silent? I'll tell you what happens. We become that voice for someone else. We ask the questions he taught us to ask. We see the potential he taught us to see. We build the world he showed us was possible, not because he's watching, but because we've learned to watch ourselves through his eyes. Every person in this room has a train story, a moment when they chose humanity over hurry. Maybe you don't know it yet, maybe it hasn't happened yet, maybe it's happening right now. But that moment, when it comes, is your inheritance from James, the understanding that kindness is a qualification, that heartbreak is a roadmap, that ordinary people doing extraordinary things is the only way the world has ever changed. The warehouse didn't feel empty after he was gone. If anything, it felt fuller. His questions echoed in every corner, his belief multiplied in every project. His insistence that business could be beautiful lived in every decision to choose people over profit. You kept his office exactly as he'd left it. The terrible coffee pot, the wall of photographs that had grown to include thousands of stories. The simple desk where world-changing ideas had been sketched on napkins, but you added one thing, a small plaque with the question that started everything. What breaks your heart? Every new person who joined the warehouse family was brought to that office, not to worship at the altar of a dead founder, but to understand the living principle that animated everything you did. They were asked the question. They were given permission to pursue the answer. They were reminded that their pain was not a weakness, but a weapon against indifference. The ripples continued to spread. Cities adopted your models as policy. Universities created courses studying your approach. Other businesses, shamed by your success or inspired by your example, began asking different questions in their boardrooms. But the moment that would have made James proudest happened on another train. You were tired. The kind of bone-deep exhaustion that comes from carrying forward someone else's dream until it becomes your own, then watching it grow beyond what either of you imagined possible. The train was crowded, as trains always are when you need them not to be. You found a seat, collapsed into it, closed your eyes for just a moment of peace in the chaos of another impossible day, made possible by sheer will and good coffee. When you opened them, a young woman was standing in front of you. She was holding something in her hand. Her clothes suggested struggle, the careful kind of put together that comes from making a little go a long way. Her eyes held that familiar look. The one you'd seen in James, the one you'd learned to recognize in mirrors, the weight of caring too much in a world that often cared too little. "Excuse me," she said. "I think you're in my seat." You looked at your ticket. She was right. In your exhaustion, you'd sat one row too far forward. "I'm so sorry," you started to say, beginning to rise. "No, please," she interrupted. "Stay. You look like you need it more than I do today." Something in her voice made you pause. That recognition of shared humanity. That small rebellion against the rules in favor of kindness. "Actually," you said, standing anyway, "let me give you this seat. And can I ask you something?" She looked puzzled but nodded as she sat down. "What breaks your heart?" And the question hung between you like a bridge waiting to be crossed. She blinked, surprised by the unexpected depth in a mundane moment. That's a strange question to ask on a train. The best questions usually are. She considered it, really considered it, while the train rocked forward and life flowed around you in its usual urgent stream. "Foster kids aging out of the system," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was one. 18 candles on a cake, and then you're on your own, like those candles were a countdown to abandonment. No family, no safety net, just nothing. I made it through, barely, but I know so many who didn't. It's not right. Growing up shouldn't be a luxury item." You reached into your pocket, pulled out a business card, not your official CEO card with its titles and credentials, a simpler one. Just your name and number and the warehouse address. "Come see me next week," you said, pressing it into her hand. "Someone who sees that kind of heartbreak is someone I want on my team." She looked at the card, then at you, confusion shifting to possibility. "But I don't have any experience with—" "You have experience with the problem. That's the only qualification that matters. Everything else is just details we can figure out." The train pulled into your stop. As you moved toward the door, she called out, "Why? Why would you offer this to a stranger?" You turned back, seeing James in the question, in the moment, in the eternal cycle of paying forward what can never be paid back. "Because someone once did the same for me. Changed my whole life with a business card on a train, and because the world breaks all our hearts eventually. The only question is whether we'll use the pieces to build something better." You stepped onto the platform, leaving her holding possibility in her hands, knowing that another ripple had just begun its journey across the pond of human potential. Walking through the city toward the warehouse, you felt the weight of everything. The responsibility, the possibility, the legacy of believing that ordinary people could do extraordinary things when given the chance. But you also felt the lightness of understanding that you weren't carrying it alone. Every person who'd ever chosen kindness over indifference was part of this story. Every seat given up was a vote for the world we were building. Your phone buzzed. An email from the young woman already. Just 2 words. Thank you. You smiled, knowing those 2 words would become a program, a movement, 1,000 foster kids finding family in a system redesigned by someone who'd lived its failures. Another heartbreak becoming another healing. Another impossible thing made possible by the simple act of seeing each other as human. The warehouse lights glowed in the distance, a beacon for the heartbroken fixers of the world. Inside, people were building tomorrow with their bare hands and stubborn hope. The coffee was still terrible. The problems were still overwhelming. The world still needed more healing than any one organization could provide. But that was okay, because somewhere right now, someone was giving up their seat on a train. Someone was handing out a business card. Someone was asking what breaks your heart. Someone was discovering that their pain was not their weakness, but their power. The universe was taking notes, preparing its next round of impossible meetings and unlikely heroes. The circle continued its sacred spin, and you, who had once been just another tired commuter on just another crowded train, were living proof that the smallest acts of kindness could reshape the world. 1 seat at a time, 1 heartbreak at a time, 1 human choosing to see another human at a time. What if that someone was you? What if your train moment is waiting at the next stop? What if the business card in your pocket is meant for someone whose heartbreak could heal thousands? The only way to find out is to keep your eyes open, your heart ready, your seat available for someone who needs it more. Because the world changes when ordinary people do extraordinary things, and extraordinary things often begin with the simplest question: please take my seat. Like this video if you believe in the power of small acts to create big change. Subscribe to join a community of people who see heartbreak as a qualification, not a weakness. Share your own train story in the comments below. The moment when kindness changed your trajectory, or when you changed someone else's. This channel is for those who believe that business can have a soul, that success should be measured in lives changed, and that the future belongs to those brave enough to build it with their broken hearts and stubborn hope. Remember, you don't need permission to be kind. You don't need a degree to solve problems. You don't need experience to start. You just need to see someone who needs a seat and have the courage to stand up. The universe is watching. The universe is waiting. The universe is ready to hand you a business card that could change everything. All you have to do is give up your seat.